Got to unmute.
Hey man, how you doing? Sorry. So I've been following the conversation for a while. I don't know if you want to stay on the messianic topics, but I wanted to ask something about Catholicism and Orthodoxy.
Okay. No, I don't. We don't have to talk about messianic prophecies. What's up?
Yeah. So two things. It's two questions, but I think that they're brief enough that you would be able to answer them. The first one is so an argument that's obviously made by a lot of Roman Catholics is appealing to certain acts, to have a certain interpretation of what is said in certain acts of certain ecumenical councils about the Pope, particularly the Sixth and the Seventh Council, relating to like Agatho's letter or stuff like that. So my first question is like, what is your take on like what's like the Orthodox take on that? And then the second question is Craig, do you buy Craig Trivilia's argument that Augustine just didn't believe the Filioque and stuff like that? I don't know what your take is on that, so I just wanted to ask.
I do not agree with that argument, and I've argued with him about it.
Okay, so
so if you read the book Papalism by Denny, he has a great explanation of how this actually disproves papalism, because number one, the Sixth Ecumenical Council is condemning a pope. So clearly the Sixth Ecumenical Council doesn't teach the indefectibility of the Roman See because Honorius defected. Secondly, if you look at the way the council treated Agatho's letter, they examined the letter to see if it was consistent with previous teaching, just like Chalcedon examined the letter to see if it was of Leo to see if it was consistent with Saint Cyril. So Cyril is the pinnacle of orthodoxy at Chalcedon, not Leo. And likewise, the previous teaching of the church at the Sixth Ecumenical Council is the pinnacle of orthodoxy, not the de facto letter of Agatho. So they spent, I think, Denny says a week, something like that, examining to see if Agatho's teaching was orthodox. Furthermore, the easy way to refute this is to point to Lateran 649, because if the attitude of this council was papal, then they would have not even investigated the teaching of Agatho, nor would they have even needed to have the Sixth Ecumenical Council, which was an imperial council. All they would have had to do was to go to the teaching of 649 Lateran, which was a Roman Catholic synod held under Pope Martin I, attended by St. Maximus the Confessor, by the way, and it had already condemned monothelitism. So if Lateran 649 was a papal-approved council already condemning monothelitism, all they would have had to do at the Sixth Ecumenical Council was say, hey, Pope Martin has already spoken, case closed. What do they always say? Rome has spoken, case is closed. Wait a minute. Lateran 649 already spoke, case closed. Yet, this doesn't solve the issue. They have an entirely different ecumenical council in 686, called by the emperor, and condemn a pope. So the fact that Agatho says that Rome is unsullied and has always taught orthodoxy, we don't have that big of a deal about that, because Rome was pretty much orthodox throughout this period, except for Honorius.
Yeah, so I have a follow-up question. Just thank you for that summary. I think I heard Sarah from Hamilton make the same point about Lateran 649, that's actually a really big point. I think there's something.
And by the way, Lateran 649 is not counted among Roman Catholic ecumenical councils, even though, according to their line of argumentation, it should be.
That's a really good point. That's something I've not heard brought up by most Orthodox or Catholics on these issues. So I'm definitely gonna have to read Denny's book on that. Question is, what was it?
Well, hold on. Before we move on to your next question, though, I mean, would you concede that if the ecumenical council is condemning Honorius for merely writing a letter advocating monothelitism, I mean, how does that square with the Vatican I doctrine of the papacy? No one judges the first see. No council is above the Pope.
Yeah. So for context, just before I say the next thing, I am a Protestant, just thinking through both sides on these issues.
Gotcha.
I actually talked to you about baptism a long time ago on the
Discord. I remember Iffy Man. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. But Yeah, so I think that is something that, as a point, I don't think I've ever. I think you probably have made this point on your streams at some point. I just maybe just missed it, because this is one of those points that I haven't really thought of. Like, yeah, like they're condemning him not because of, well, he went up in front of the whole church and said blah 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 blah, but he wrote a letter and they were like, no, the letter's not orthodox.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that the letter was enough to get him condemned. So that shows that. In terms of like how trad cats argue this stuff, Roman Catholics argue it, it doesn't require the Pope making something dogma for him to be a heretic or heterodox. Do you understand why that is? Because if the status of authority and infallibility or magisterial status was what was necessary to make Francis or whoever a potential heretic, nobody could be a heretic but the Pope, because nobody can do that but the Pope.
Yeah.
Was Martin Luther binding anybody to his justification doctrine? Does he have the power to do that in the Roman Catholic Church? No, and yet he's a heretic. Why? Because authority has nothing to do with whether you're a heretic or not.
Yeah. That's a very fair point. Very fair point. Would you... So relating to the question I made about Augustine, right? For you guys, you basically say so first you would basically say that Craig's reading on that is just straight up wrong. And
right. Yes.
Because I found that interesting that because a lot of Orthodox guys would point me to what Craig said about it.
Right. Well, Craig thinks that an Orthodox person, for whatever reason, I don't know if he still thinks this, but at one time he thought that you can't have theological mistakes. So basically he has this thing that he thinks he has to make everybody have the same theology, and I think that's just false. It's wrong. It's not. It's just incoherent.
I saw him one time. Somebody said, I actually have seen this. Now this may be deleted. This may be a long time ago on a thread somewhere. I saw him sort of try to defend the concept that the fathers are infallible at one point.
Yeah, I'm saying he has argued that type of a thing. I don't know if he still holds that. So
Yeah, that's really so for you guys would say okay, Augustine was wrong, but it doesn't really matter to his sainthood on that, right?
Right. Yeah, I think multiple church fathers and saints have made errors. And I think that honesty requires that. I mean, Photius admits this in the Mystagogy that they made errors.
So it will basically mean they made errors, but what's really important is what the church is affirming through its councils. So we're not going to...
if something is a disputed question, I mean, there's going to be periods of flexibility and open issue, right? There's going to be periods of debate. So, can Gregory of Nyssa get it wrong when it comes to apocatastasis? Sure. So what?
That makes a lot of sense. That makes way more sense than what the other Orthodox that I've heard Trulia say, is because that does because I would look at the Chechensky's book on the Filioque, and he's I think it's really early in the book. He's Augustine teaches the Filioque, and that's a scholar, right? And I was well, that doesn't work with what any of these other guys are saying whatsoever. So the fact that you're able to explain like that, I appreciate that, because it definitely it causes less problems to have that sort of perspective.
Well, let's just take the issue of differing lists of church fathers on different canons of Scripture. So many of them got it wrong in terms of what in the Orthodox Church would be the normative canon. So, I guess they're all heretics now, right? I mean, this is the easiest way to refute this kind of silly view that the church fathers are individually infallible on theology. I mean, Jerome has a different canon than John Damascus, okay? And they're both saints, because if something's an open question, we don't automatically condemn people because they got something wrong. But there's this weird idea that if you are deified, that somehow you can't make a theological mistake. I just think that's silly.
Appreciate that. I do appreciate that. That does actually make a lot of things make more sense in my mind.
Okay. Do you have any other issues or questions or topics? What do you want to get to?
Oh, okay. So on the what are y'all's take on succession within churches that are not in communion with Eastern Orthodox? Is there just no grace there, or you would take an agnostic view, there might be, but we cannot be sure whatsoever? so you should be EO, or there definitely isn't. I just want to know your perspective. I'm not really like debating that.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have access to what grace God has granted to individuals in other communions. The judgments that we make are based on the public confessions of those groups. So the public confession of the Baptist or the whoever, Pentecostals or whatever, and even groups that have a kind of a succession. Ultimately, if you've lost the Orthodox faith, the church might judge the case that you have the rituals done correctly, but it doesn't really matter if it's absolute succession is not a mechanical thing where you're automatically apostolic, even if you have lost the Orthodox faith. And that's something Saint Athanasius says that about the heretics and schismatics, that even if they have succession, if they've lost the faith, what does that really get you? Now, it might get you something in the sense that if the church receives you and judges that case to be a situation where they don't have to be reordained, and that economia can accept that they were vested or whatever, then that's the decision of the local synods and the economy of the bishop. But that's a different issue from, do we think that anybody has, if there was no grace for people in other churches or groups, then they would never be able to come to Orthodoxy. You can only come through grace. But we don't make judgments on people's individual salvation, because Paul says, what do we have to do with judging those that are without? We don't have access to that information. So our job is to just tell them to become Orthodox.
I appreciate that. That definitely. Can you